The cane facilitates the joy of movement. We want children to visit the world and learn that it's a friendly place to be in and to discover it and to explore it. And the way to do that is respecting them as a blind child who need age and stage appropriate skills of blindness. Orientation mobility began as a profession after World War II, when blinded veterans came back from the war with visual loss and different degrees of visual disability and actually other medical issues. And the Veterans Administration developed, quote, formalized O&M. So it was developed by sighted individuals for individuals who had sight, adults who lost their vision in war. I think of that as a top down model. By that I mean, out of the concept that the adult had in their brain, they could perform the experience. So when they learned about extension of the arm for cane and how to cover, that was a concept, and they already had that. When working with children, and as I worked with younger and younger children, I realized that top down was not appropriate. And so I developed what was begun to be thought at in the 80s as this concept of bottom up. And bottom up, the difference is out of the experience comes the concept. So the young child is going to play with the cane, they're going to have a variety of fun things to do with it, and then gradually they will learn to hold the cane. Now, the conventional approach, this top-down approach, says if you start too early, you're going to really mess kids up with their hand skills, and that'll be a problem. But I read an article by a blind guy, Dr. Fred Schroeder, who really had a great analogy, and the analogy was this. You don't take crayons away from a toddler scribbling in a coloring book because you're afraid they're not going to learn the alphabet properly at 4 or 5 years of age. So I said, I'm not going to take a cane away from a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old for that matter, scribbling on the ground with the cane, because out of that will come the movement components for higher level skill functioning. And what's so exciting as a professional service provider is that when we buy into this bottom-up approach in working with blind children, instead of applying a conventional approach that's adult-centered, we really are working with a gain model, because the conventional model worked with individuals who had vision and lost it and set up a generation for the next couple of decades of a vision loss model and a deficit thinking about blindness. Whereas when we work with children, we're not thinking deficits, we're thinking assets, and we're thinking gains each day in their development and their progressions in child development. For the blind children who begin to develop ideas that they are different or missing something, there's kind of two different philosophies here. One is to nurture the development. Yeah, there's a difference. You'll be doing some things differently, but that difference isn't a deficit. It's just different. It's a different normality. I think the quote by Dr. Fred Schroeder is very apt, that a blind person is not a deficient sighted person. As human beings, we all need preview. We need to know what's ahead. As a sighted individual, I get preview visually. I can scan visually. A blind child, or a blind adult for that matter, is scanning and using a cane, for example, to get preview. The conventional approach is a shorter cane. The non-conventional approach has to do with a longer cane approach to travel. If I had a choice of having vision at 2 feet or 4 feet, I'm going to take 4 feet because I'm going to have more preview. Around the late 1980s, I had gotten to the point that I had a developmental piece for working with blind children from the bottom up. And I knew the reasons for the longer cane approach developmentally that were important for blind children to use a longer cane. But I didn't know about lighter canes that could be longer, because when you use the long metal canes, they compromise the hand functioning of blind children. And blind children didn't have the ability of the young kids of extending their arms, so you needed a longer cane. So I was introduced to the National Federation of the Blind by family, parents of a blind child, and I went to my first convention, and there. First thing that hit me that was the most exciting, I saw a number of people who were already using them, meaning the longer cane approach to travel. And so, as a professional service provider, it educated me to a whole world of alternative skills and this longer cane approach that I did not get in my conventional training. Then I started to listen to what their message was, which is one of, you know, their logo of equality, opportunity, and security. And it's the National Federation of the Blind. Blind persons organized to promote their equality, opportunity, and security in society. And to learn from that as a professional service provider and to partner with that, to me, made my job a lot more sensible and actually easier because we shared the responsibility together. I remember having my first experience under blindfold. Sleep shades is the term used often. Under sleep shades, where I was sleep shaded and I was taught a mobility lesson on the streets of Chicago by a blind travel instructor. And up to that point, I had heard about blind travel instructors, but I had never experienced and certainly been taught by one. Walking with Arlene Hill, who is the blind travel instructor, and how we entered different parts of the hotel, it was a very different experience than the sighted travel instructors that I've been under sleep shades with. There was an interpretation of the environment and questions asked me about the environment that had me link more into what I was smelling, like when we were in the pool area, or the feeling of the different texture under my feet and being more aware of my touch and the feeling of the cane, or purposely making tapping sounds to get echolocation information. Those examples were more the use of touch and sound that I was not familiar with than when I was under the sleep shades with a sighted travel instructor, when I was trying to impose more of my visual memory of what a street or what a room might be like, and not really listening to what the cane was telling me. In 1994, Carol Castellano is a parent of a blind child, and she and I did a presentation at a national convention, the National Federation of the Blind. And at the end of the session, a few parents came up to us and said it was very helpful to learn about early movement experience, facilitating them, and the use of the cane. But we would like to know a little bit more about how we use the cane with our own child back home. So we looked at the schedule, and the next morning we said, well, there's free time in the morning. Why don't we get together? There happened to be a mall next to this hotel. And why don't we get together and check the cane out and just take a little walk with it? So we sat down with the parents first. There were 4 parents, and this is 1994. Every parent was from a different part of the country. Every parent had purchased a longer cane to have a longer cane approach for their child. And every parent had the experience back home of having that cane taken away from them by the conventionally trained mobility instructor. So they didn't know how to use this cane. So we said, okay, let's go on a quote cane walk. And Carol took 2 parents, I took 2 parents, and we went on the walk. And as we did, we had extra canes with us, and we said, well, this what we need here is for the parents to have a cane so that there's an attunement between the parent and child, because some of them were as young as 2, and very early on, parent and child are indivisible. You know, they're an inseparable unit. So that's how we started with the idea of the parent having a cane and the child having a cane and just going on a cane walk. And each year it seems to have gotten bigger and wider, and more parents taking advantage of it at the convention. You know, I was coming to the realization that the early start to cane travel put the child at an advantage. And so we were in the mall. Anthony, his mother, and I had my teaching cane, and I had a cane for Anthony, and I also had a cane for the mother because I wanted her to learn a little bit about cane travel. Uh, but I didn't quite know what my approach was going to be because I had never worked with a baby and a cane that young. And my first experience was in teaching the parent, which I have done before, but with older children. This time, as the mother was holding the cane in one hand and holding Anthony in her other, Anthony reached out and mimicked the mother's experience with the cane, tapping it, sliding it, and showed an interest in what she was doing. The mother thought, okay, I'm going to put Anthony down on the ground, and she put him on the floor. He held on to the shaft of the cane. She slid it, he slid it. She tapped it, he tapped it. She began to take a step, he took a step. And together, mother and child shared this experience and were walking using a cane together. I've been criticized for starting too early with the cane in early intervention, particularly under 3 years of age, particularly under 2 years of age, that the cane is obtrusive. But when you watch a child with their imagination has all possibilities of using a cane, what you're watching is an active learner and a child who's deciding what they want to do to explore the environment, kind of a discovery approach to learning about the environment. Jessica and I had been playing with each other for quite a while, and she got to the point that she just had enough of me and she wanted out and she wanted to go to her mommy. And so she moved from me, slapped her hands as she's crawling, and as she got close to the kitchen cabinet, she bumped into it and stopped and sat down and thought about it and had a kind of interesting thinking look on her face. And then she crawled again up to those cabinets, but this time stopped, made a turn, went parallel to it, and at the end of the kitchen cabinet seemed to have heard the end of it and put her hand out to check it. It wasn't there, made the turn, and went into the living room to find her mother. That was the use of echolocation in Jessica, which is the use of reflected sound, but I had never seen it demonstrated with a baby who was crawling. We teachers not only think and feel the responsibility that we should know what there is to do with children, and in this case, blind children, but often it's doing to them or for them. And all children learn, I do it for you, I do it with you, and then you do it alone. Blind children are vulnerable that we're still doing for them when they can do it alone. And with multiply disabled or multi-disabled blind children, uh, we need to wait for their response sometimes. We may say something, we may set the stage of activities where they're interacting with, but the timetable and how they respond might be on what we consider a delay. And if we don't factor that delay in, we just repeat our verbal input or we repeat our touch interactions, which are often too much touch on the child. And they've got to then rethink and begin at point, A again, of what their response was going to be, as opposed to just sit back and wait the child out so that the child can initiate the movement based on how they need to initiate the movement. I remember working with a child who um, is autistic and totally blind. A real challenge, totally blind, autistic child. And she had learned to use the cane in one hand. I think it was her right hand. But children need to learn to use the cane in another hand. Sometimes you come to the stairs, the railing's on the right, you need to switch hands with your cane to the left. And no matter how many times I was trying this conventional approach, or we would think is common sense of switching hands with the cane, she would not want to give up that cane from her right hand. often the way autistic children learn something for the first time is the way they're going to want to maintain it. So one day I was out in the hallway with her, and my shoelace became untied, and I had my teaching cane with me, and I said to Michelle, "Would you please hold on to my teaching cane?" And she held on to my teaching cane, and while I was tying my shoe, I heard this sound. I looked up, and Michelle was walking down the hallway using both canes as double Dutch jump ropes. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh, aha, it's not the takeaway theory of teaching, it's the add on theory. And by giving her a second cane, she didn't have to give up the cane in her right hand. So the next several cane lessons, we used two canes. And then eventually she became comfortable with in her left hand, and then she would naturally switch the one cane that she held to her left or right hand whenever she needed it. For children, toys are their tools. A tool is a handheld object. For the child, it's a handheld object for self amusement, curiosity, exploration, discovery, play. Blind children are vulnerable to having their time so structured and hands on them that they are not freely choosing what to play with or how to play with it. The cane facilitates the joy of movement. Every child, it's the drive to be, from on the floor, the on the floor baby, to the crawling child, to the standing, walking child. It's a drive to move and the need to know. And the cane facilitates that. We want children to visit the world and learn that it's a friendly place to be in and to discover it and to explore it. And the way to do that is respecting them as a blind child who need age and stage appropriate skills of blindness. Vision is not a requirement for travel, and it is not a requirement for life. What's important fundamentally as a human being is observation and not vision in itself. That we may look with the eyes, but we really understand, we really see and decode it in the brain. When we understand that it's observation that matters and not vision in itself, and that there are alternative skills of blindness, for example, that what we find is that when we observe blind babies, when we observe their development in blind children, we learn more about the holistic nature of all babies, of all children, the essence of their creator, the baby who adapts, the child who can compensate, the new skills to be learned. We find out that differences aren't deficits, just a different normality and a different way to live and be a full participant in society. That's what we find.